Welcome to another episode of the Military Money Manual podcast. I'm Jamie.
And I'm Spencer.
And today we're going to finish up part 3 of our series of 9 money principles to live your life by.
So today we're going to go over 3 of the principles, the last 3, 7, 8, and 9. And those principles are keep your investments low cost, automatic, diversified, and simple, or like I abbreviated in the book, LADS, L-A-D-S. So that's one of the principles we're going to talk about today. We're also going to talk about principle number 8, spend your money on what matters most to you, which is something that at any income level, we need to be reminded about. And then principle number 9 is buy income producing assets, which gets back to principle number 7 as well, which is keep your investments low cost, automatic, diversified, and simple. So Jamie, do you want to go over the first 6 principles that we went over in the last 2 episodes?
Yeah, so this is part 3, like I said. So if you haven't listened to part 1 and part 2, as much as we were grateful you're here with us today, you should stop, go back and listen to part 1 and part 2 first. But just quickly, let's review the first 6 principles that we talked about previously. The first one, spend less than you earn, which is pretty basic, like we said, but a lot of people have to be reminded about that, and that really impacts your financial abilities and status as well. Number 2, don't accumulate debt. Number 3, pay down your high interest debt as soon as possible. Next, number 4, save a 3-month emergency fund. Number 5, maximize your tax advantage retirement contributions. And then the last one we've covered so far, number 6, was remember that savings rate beats investment return. And all these are coming out in the book, which I'll turn it over to you, Spencer, to talk about that.
Yeah, so been working on this book, actually first published I would say the first draft on Amazon back in 2017. It was called The Intelligent Military Investor back then. And since then, I've been working with this really awesome editor, and we're going to self-publish it. So the files went to the printer today, August 28th, 2021. And hopefully we'll have hard covers printed and available for purchase by Thanksgiving of this year. So a little bit delayed if you listen to some of the previous episodes. I think I promised an August release date, but I've definitely learned a lot about the publishing industry since going through this process. And the new book is completely revised. It's had a lot of great feedback from beta readers, from my editor, from you, Jamie. You were one of the first people to get a look at it. And it's just really exciting. I'm really happy with the way the book turned out, and the cover looks beautiful. I've seen the mock-ups, and I think it's going to be a really nice addition to anybody's library, any military service member who's interested in achieving financial independence sooner rather than later.
Yeah, it's a really good book, easy to read, short, quick read, and it looks sharp too. And it's just a lot of practical wisdom in there. And remind us again where we can find that and where we should be looking for it.
Yeah, so the best place to find it, you can actually go pre-order it right now on a Military Money Manual, same address as or same name as the podcast, militarymoneymanual.com/book, BOOK, or Bravo, Oscar Kilo for those of you in the military. And you can pick up a pre-order ebook, audiobook, hardcover book, or the best deal is you can get all 3 versions for a really good price directly through my website. And then for those of you who want to support our corporate overlords, it'll be available on Amazon as well eventually. But the best place to get it right now is on militarymoneymanual.com/book. So go ahead.
All right. So that's great. We're really looking forward to that and excited for that. Let's dive in now to the last 3 principles in our part 3 series, number 7.
Yeah. So number 7, keep your investments low cost, automatic, diversified, and simple. So one of my beta readers had the great feedback when he was reading through this was, you can make an easy to read acronym out of that, LADS, L-A-D-S. And I thought that was pretty cool. So I went with that in the book, but we'll focus on, we'll take them one at a time. And these are just investment principles and principles of investing that if you read just about every single investment book out there, they're all going to boil down to essentially these 4 concepts. So one thing that you'll find when you do the deep dive research into books like A Random Walk Down Wall Street or The Little Book of Common Sense Investing by Jack Bogle, or you look at any of the research, right, of passive versus active mutual funds, is that the lower you can keep your costs, the better your investments perform. And that's just because of the sheer mathematical reason that when you have higher costs, that means your gains are going to the person selling you or managing the product for you, the investment for you.
Wait, so are you saying that a very expensive fund at an expensive firm with a lot of overhead does not generate more income?
Yeah, actually, that's and if you look at the bet that Warren Buffett did, right? He in 2000, I think it was 2008 or 2007, he bet a group of hedge fund managers that a simple S&P 500 index. So you think of like SPY is one of the big ones, or at Vanguard, it's VOO. An index fund like that, where it just has the largest 500 companies in America, all the companies you've heard about, Microsoft, Apple, Google, Tesla now even. And you just take a fund like that doesn't actively buy, sell, or trade, and it just invests in those 500 companies over a 10-year period. After fees, the S&P 500 fund would do better than the hedge funds. And that's exactly what happened. In fact, it was so bad that the hedge funds called the bet off after, I think it was 8 or 9 years. They didn't even get to the full 10 years just because the S&P 500 was averaging 13% a year. Now, it was right after the 2008 stock market crash. So it was a really good time to be invested in the S&P 500. But if the simple index fund is making that return, well, the hedge fund should have been making even more. But at a hedge fund, for instance, most of them do a fee structure called 2 and 20, where they have 2% of your invested assets are taken as fees every year, and then 20% of your profits. So that's just insane to me. I don't know why, I do know why a lot of people invest in there, is because sometimes they do have pretty good returns, and it sounds sexy, but at the end of the day, it's been proven time and time again that the low cost, just simple index funds tend to outperform the actively managed funds.
Yeah. So people see, they might look at a 1 in a million person who there might be someone out there that beats the stock market, but it's probably not you. And the likelihood of you getting wealthy off of consistent, safe, relatively safe index fund investing compared to you trying to time the market, pick the next big Amazon or Netflix or GameStop or whatever else, it's not likely that you're going to pick well. But if you just do the index fund, you will succeed. And it might not be as sexy as you said. You might not get 4,000% returns like you might on a big risk investment, but you're gonna do well in the long run.
Yeah, well, it's kind of like that book that we just recently read, Psychology of Money, right? Where Morgan Housel, the author, was saying, I think it was something along the lines of, I can afford to be an average investor, but I can't afford to be a below average investor.
Yeah.
And when you buy the index funds, like, you're guaranteed to make the average market return, because that's all an index fund can do.
Yeah.
It's just return the average return in the market. But if you look at the average return for, or the average return of the average investor over the past couple of years, it's averaged 3 or 4% when the stock market has done 7 or 8%. And so you have to wonder, like, why is the average investor not even meeting the average return? And that's because they're making dumb decisions. They're buying high and they're selling low, and they're not just buying and holding the low cost stock market index.
Yeah. So in addition to, there's a lot of ways that they get you, not just taking a percentage of your profits or a percentage of your in your portfolio. So we can talk about comparing expense ratios. We can talk about front load fees. And even remember, even in a down year, if you pay them 1% of your portfolio, even if your portfolio is down 10% that year, they still take 1% of that out. So it just kicks you while you're down. So there's a lot of ways, even like the tax impacts of high turnover in the account, depending on who's managing it and how often they're buying and selling. So it's just a very consistent way to make it work well at a low cost.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and that's the thing with the high fees, that when I started doing the research, and this was something that I picked up, when I was still in college, the difference between high fee funds and low fee funds. And if you look at, the returns that are captured over a 40-year period, if you're paying just 1%, which is like a typical mutual fund expense ratio per year, versus a Vanguard fund or a TSP fund, which is doing 0.05% expense ratio, you're losing almost 30%. I think it's 30 or 33% of your returns to the fees. And, you don't think about that initially, right? Because you've only got $1,000 there or $10,000 in there, right? So like 1% doesn't mean that much, but compounded over years and years, it adds up so fast. And it just really, there used to be a great chart, and I actually put it in my book from Vanguard, where they show the difference between 0.05% and a 1% fee. And it's, over a long enough period of time, it starts adding up a lot.
Yeah, and think about when we talk about front load fees, some of them are as high as 5% or probably more out there, but 5% is kind of a common front load out there. So if you have a lump sum of $10,000 to invest in your kid's 529 or whatever retirement account, or just generic investment account, you put $10,000 in there and they automatically take that that 5%, which would be $500 off the top before they invest it. So you're automatically losing $500. And then that's $500 less in there to grow with compound interest.
Yeah. The front load fees are really, just really terrible for the average investor. You look at a lot of, I think one of the most notorious ones for me is First Command. A lot of military service members have heard of them, and they've had some pretty predatory practices in the past, selling wholly unsuitable life insurance products and investment products to military service members. But if you look at a lot of their funds, exactly, they have 5% front load fees. So that means you're like, you got to make 5% right off the top, right off
just
the bat,
to break even.
And you're just to break even. Yeah. Right? You're already behind. Yep.
So what are some tangible numbers we should be looking for as we look at a fund, whether prospectus or a company? What companies should we be looking at? And are there a certain percentage where it's kind of an acceptable? Because there's not going to be free. Everything costs something, even the TSP. What are some good numbers or fund companies to look at?
Yeah, so if you look at the TSP, so the TSP publishes their expense ratios every year, and it's usually, I think, a bit later in the year, like summer, and it's the ratios for the previous year. So it's a bit hard to have a real time indication of what the TSP's fees are, but traditionally the TSP has been one of the cheapest and lowest expense ratios that you'll see on any fund. So I remember when I first came into the military, I think they were 0.03%, and they kind of ticked up over the years, another 0.04, 0.05, but they say that a lot of that is because of the BRS and some additional paperwork that they've had to do. But still, anything under 0.05%, you can basically neglect. It's so minuscule. It's not even really worth the difference between a 0.04 and a 0.03 is not going to make or break you. However, the difference between 0.05 and 0.25, compounded over 40 years can be a substantial amount of money. But a lot of times, like the 0.25, 0.3%, Vanguard offers a personal advisory service, and that's at 0.3% or 30 basis points. And then Betterment, which is another, kind of popular robo advisor, they call them, you can get that, and they'll build a portfolio for you for 0.25%. So I kind of, with the Vanguard and the Betterment, that's kind of my baseline, the 0.3, 0.25%. If you have anybody who's helping you pick funds or is robo advising you, that's kind of like my benchmark there. If you're paying more than that, like I know Personal Capital, I think is like 0.79%, 0.8%. That's getting pretty high. I don't know what Personal Capital is offering that Betterment or Vanguard can't offer, right?
Yeah. I just looked up the TSP. So as of today, what's on their tsp.gov, the C fund total expense ratio, which is net admin plus investment, is 0.051%. The S fund is a little bit higher, 0.068%. And so the S fund is the highest at 0.068% total expense ratio.
Yeah. So, but still, those are historically pretty low. The Vanguard total stock market index funds, which I talk a lot about in my book, but that's kind of, again, the benchmark index fund for me. They have, I think it's down to 0.04, 0.03% on the VTI or the Admiral fund, Admiral shares VTSAX. So, anything under 0.1%, it's fine. Fidelity, Schwab. I know Fidelity has some zero index funds. They're probably losing a little bit of money on those, kind of using them as loss leaders, trying to get some more capital over to Fidelity. That's fine. As you as the consumer, you're still paying 0% for it. And the Fidelity, total stock market index fund is not going to perform that much differently from the Vanguard total stock market index fund. Yeah.
So like VTSAX, we're comparing 0.04% to like a 1.25 or sometimes 3%. For an expensive investment advice. So 0.04 compared to 1.25% or higher.
Right. So I kind of anything, if you're paying more than a 0.5%, more than 0.50 or 50 basis points, you really got to look at that investment and see, why is your expense ratio so high on that? And what are you getting for it? If you're getting, if it comes with an investment advisor, okay, but maybe you can just hire a fiduciary, investment planner for $300 a year. And, once every quarter, he takes a look at your portfolio and gives you some advice on it rather than, there's nothing else in life. Like if you went to go buy a car and they said, okay, you can have this car, but we're going to take 1% of your net worth for the next 30 years, you would say you're crazy. That's insane. Like there's no other product that we buy that's based on how much money you have.
Yeah.
So I really encourage everyone, outside the TSP, you're pretty safe. There's really nothing you can buy in the TSP that's going to be expensive in terms of expense ratios. And you can see the expense ratios, anytime you look at a fund, it'll have a little column. Like on Vanguard or on Fidelity or on the TSP, there'll be a place that says like fees or expenses, and it'll have the expense ratio there.
Okay, great.
So again,
sorry.
If you're seeing anything around 0.1% or lower, then you should be pretty good.
Okay, so low cost is definitely important. Let's transition over to automatic, and how do we set up our investment to be automatic for us?
Yeah. So, the easiest way here, right, for military service members is you got to do the TSP. It comes right out of, you set it up in MyPay or for the Marines, I think it's PayNet. I can't remember what the Marine Corps calls their MyPay like system, but, you can set it up right in MyPay and the money comes out and you never even see it, hit your bank account. So you don't even miss it. So I know a lot of people who, like you and me, we're maxing our TSP. So, and for me, being in the BRS, I want to stagger my payments so that I max it out by December. So that way I get the 5% match every month. For someone who's not in the BRS, then you can front load it as soon as possible. And then you have nice fat paychecks for the rest of the year that you can throw into your IRA or taxable brokerage account. But the biggest thing there is avoiding decision fatigue. So if you Google, there's a bunch of psychology studies on decision fatigue, but basically like the reason they put the high margin items in a grocery store right by the register is because you've already had to make 100 decisions while you're walking through the grocery store. And so they kind of figured this out, through trial and error, but you can put the highest margin, the gum, right? A pack of gum is $2 and it costs a penny to produce, right? And by that point, you've already made 100 decisions and you're tired and you're like, oh yeah, what, just throw the gum on there. Why not? Yeah. Or, when they present you, it's the same thing at shops these days that use any of those tablets, right? They present you with, the lowest is 18%, and then 20%, then 25% tip, right? And then there's a little bar, where you can like customize your tip, right? But you've already made, a bunch of decisions. You just want to click a button and be done with it, right? So, and that's kind of why, because decision fatigue is a real thing, you don't want to have to decide every month, okay, how much am I saving this month? Okay, I gotta, you're putting barriers in your own way if you don't set up automation. So if you log into MyPay and you set up the money to go into your TSP, and you log into your TSP and you say, this is how I want the money invested, and you do that on the first of the year, you don't have to think about your TSP again until the following year. And even then, if you set your contribution correctly, then you might not have to think about it for a couple of years.
Yeah, and so after you've maxed out the TSP, and if you're using an investment account, Schwab or Vanguard or whatever, you can still set up an automatic transfer from your USA or Navy Federal account to automatically transfer over to your Vanguard or whatever investment account at the 1st or 15th of the month, whenever it makes sense in your budget. So automatic can be, the TSP is very easy for us, and it can also be applied to your other accounts as well.
Yeah. And the other thing too is, a lot of people talk about DCA or dollar cost averaging versus lump sum investing. And they say, well, how does that figure into an automatic investment strategy where you just set it and forget it? And my response to that is usually, well, if you look at the research, usually lump sum investing performs better than dollar cost averaging an amount of money in over a period of months. And another question a lot of people have is, well, what about like my monthly paycheck? Like, should I save it up and then invest it all at once? Isn't that lump sum investing? Or am I dollar cost averaging by investing it every month? And the answer there is, well, you're putting it to work as soon as possible if you set it up to automatically invest as soon as you get it. And that's usually the optimal solution there. And
maximum time in the market is a big advantage.
Yes.
Okay, so we got low cost, and we have automatic. The next part of the strategy is diversified.
Yeah, so I like to say, I read it on a different website, but don't look for a needle in a haystack, just buy the whole haystack. So diversification, right? It can be across different assets. It can be across different stocks, so you can, instead of just owning, all of your net worth is in Tesla, right? So the value of your portfolio swings up and down daily based on what Tesla is doing. Well, instead of that, you can add a little bit of diversification and buy, a share of Microsoft or buy a share of Apple. And, before you know it, if you take that argument far enough, then you should just buy an index fund, right? Because now you own every publicly traded company in America, and you can even own most of the publicly traded companies in the world if you do like a Vanguard Total International Stock Index Fund. So with index funds, the TSP is made up of a bunch of 5 different index funds, and the life cycle fund. If you purchase one of those, it automatically diversifies between stocks and bonds, international and domestic stocks inside the lifecycle fund. So I really like that. And it's also gets back to the automated principle that we talked about earlier, where if you've got, you just set up the lifecycle fund once, and then you don't have to worry about setting your asset allocation or, okay, am I going to buy US stocks this year or international stocks this year? You don't have to worry about any of that. It just automatically adjusts for you.
Yeah, the TSP is great. Another way to think about diversification too is to avoid having a large portion of your portfolio in a single company. So if you work for Enron and you own a bunch of Enron stock options from your company, that would not be a good diversification. So you may want to consider balancing that a little bit. So we can talk individual companies, we can talk stocks versus bonds, and we can also talk about tax diversification, where we have maybe some traditional retirement accounts and some Roth retirement accounts, right?
Yeah. So the traditional versus Roth debate, for most military service members, you're going to be better off if you contribute to your Roth IRA and your Roth TSP, just because our tax rate is so low. But if you didn't do that and you already contributed to your traditional TSP or traditional IRA, that's fine. It might not be completely optimal, but it's okay, especially as your income grows, to have some of your money in traditional accounts and some of your money in Roth accounts. And, over, 20, 30, 40 years, the difference might just get completely washed out because tax rates might go up, or you might have, made a better decision with the Roth accounts because you paid your taxes then, and now tax rates are higher in retirement, based on the way that the U.S. is going, that's a possibility. But, if you have a little bit of money in both accounts, then when you get to retirement, you can decide where you want to take the money out of. And if you don't want to pay taxes in a certain year, then you take the money out of your Roth account. And if your income is very low in retirement, then you can tap in your traditional accounts and take the money out of there.
Okay. Yeah. So diversified portfolio is good. Where are you, not to share any intention of sharing any investment advice, but at your stage in life right now, what's about your balance between stocks and bonds?
So right now, I've got, if you go to my website and search asset allocation, I talk about exactly how I'm investing in my TSP, my IRA, my taxable brokerage. But it basically breaks down to 70% US stocks, 25% international stocks, and 5% bonds. And, the US stocks are just big index funds. So it's the C fund, the S fund, the Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund, the Admiral Shares VTSAX, and then the international stocks. I don't actually hold any of the international stuff in my TSP, just because the I fund I don't think accurately represents all the foreign stocks that are out there. Like, for instance, for political reasons, the TSP doesn't invest in any Chinese stocks. But I think, not getting political, but just looking at world trends, Chinese stocks will probably be a big factor in the world. If not today, then 20 years from now. And then my bond allocation is super low, so 5%. I mean, it's barely noticeable. If you do any kind of like back test in like portfoliovisualizer.com or any of those sites that allow you to back test, 5% bonds really doesn't change anything about your returns over a long period of time. After the 2020 March COVID crash, I thought very heavily about shifting a lot more of my asset allocations to bonds. But by the time I made the decision the market came roaring back, and It was kind of hard at that point. But one thing I am doing actually right now is I did shift so that all the additional money going into my TSP last year and this year is going into all my G fund and F fund. So if you look at my TSP, it's, maybe 60, 70% C fund, 20, 30% S fund, the small cap and the big cap stock market index funds that they have in there. But all the new money that's coming in, so my contributions for this year and my contributions for last year are all going to the CNF fund. So that's, and that's just, the G and F fund. And that's just part of, shifting my portfolio a little bit more towards bonds. But honestly, it's not going to, I probably won't even hit 10% in the next year or two, even though that's kind of the target that I'm shooting for. And that's only because if there is another big dip, I want to have a little bit of bonds that I can move into stocks to take advantage of a big, COVID-like crash again. So, but how about yourself? Where are you at these days?
So I have a little more in bonds. I'm a little closer to 20% in bonds. And then in the TSP, I do CS&I. So my overall portfolio is about 80 to 85% stocks, not differentiating between US and international. I do have maybe around 10% in international stocks.
Yeah. That's, I think, the home bias, you'll hear that term a lot for like why people hold more stocks of their home country. And it happens in, UK citizens own a lot more UK stocks, right? French citizens, if they own stocks, own French stocks. US citizens tend to own a lot more US stocks. But if you look at the total global stock market capitalization, it's about 50-50 right now between the US and the rest of the world. Is that the right answer? I have no idea. I actually talk about that in my asset allocation post. What is the right ratio of international stocks to US stocks? Mine right now, 25% in international and 70% in US. So obviously I'm tilted a little bit heavier towards the US there, but who knows? Maybe if you look at the PE, the price earnings ratio of which is getting a little technical, but if you look at that for international stocks, it's much lower than US stocks. So, if history is any guide, then that means international stocks are cheaper and should perform better over the next 5, 10, 15 years. So, but we'll see. We'll see if that actually happens, or if my essential bet on the U.S. stock market performing better is actually true. But either way, I still own tons of international stocks and tons of U.S. stocks. So I think in either way, I'm going to win.
Yeah, for sure. And don't let all the options out there paralyze you in not knowing what to do. All right. So low cost, automatic, diversified, and simple. Everyone always says never invest in anything you don't understand. What do we do with simple?
Yeah, I think it's, if you have a 5-year-old child, and maybe that's a little young, but if you can't explain to a kid or to your grandma, like what you're investing in, maybe it's not a great place to hold most of your assets. And, this is a direct dig on cryptocurrencies because it's, the concept of money itself is hard enough to explain to someone. Now try to explain the concept of digital money that has, no government backing whatsoever. So, for a stock, right? For instance, we'll just take the simplest case there. You're buying a little piece of a company. So now as a shareholder, as a partial owner of Apple, anytime an iPhone is sold, some small percentage of that iPhone will make its way back into your pocket, whether it's through a dividend or it's through a share price appreciation.
Yeah. And is there ever a time where maybe dabbling with a little bit of, with a small percentage, just like a little fun account or something like that?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, like personally, I have, a couple $1,000 in crypto right now. And, we have a good friend at work who is heavily involved in the cryptocurrency world and, told us about this hot crypto tip. And so we both were like, you know what, let's place a little bet on this and see what happens. And for the first 6 months, it went down about 40%. So
yeah,
I think we're.
Yeah. But the important thing to remember is it's not a hypocritical statement. It's such a small percentage that if this crypto hot tip did go all the way to zero, it'd be no big deal. So it's more of it's almost like playing fantasy football to me is this is kind of fun. We're keeping up with a new team I've never followed before because this defense is on my fantasy roster this year.
Yeah, that's exactly right. It's such a small percentage of my net worth that I don't even factor it in when I add up my net worth. A couple of years ago, my net worth got to the point where I stopped including the value of my car. And so if my crypto investments are worth less than the value of my car, then I'm not going to include them in my net worth statement. So I'm still maxing out my TSP. I'm still maxing out my and my wife's IRA every year. And the crypto thing is really just, it's just dabbling. It's a small percentage. And then, for me personally, the big thing with doing any kind of these alternative or alt investments is you got to have an exit strategy, right? Like where do you put the money? Let's say you do hit it big and you bought Bitcoin when it was, $300 a Bitcoin, and now it's $30,000 a Bitcoin, and you just 1,000 or 100x to your return. Do you keep it in Bitcoin forever, or do you move some of the money out and buy yourself a house, or how do you deal with that windfall? And where's your safe refuge? If you've never owned stock index funds and you've only owned Bitcoin and your Bitcoin does amazing, you're probably just going to buy more crypto. And that's fine if that's what you think is the best way to go. But, with how volatile the crypto market is, if personally I had a windfall like that, I would definitely be taking a lot of money off the table and moving it into, my safe refuge and have an exit strategy. And, but how about you? What would you do if you had a crypto windfall?
Yeah, I think I would probably tend more to take maybe what I initially invested, maybe take that, let it double, and then pull it out, or something where I have like a big benefit, and then let the rest just play as more fun money. You see the news stories of, I think it was an NFL rookie that invested his entire first, paycheck in crypto, and then it exploded. And I think for every person you hear about that on the positive side, there's probably 50 or 100 of them where it did not work out for them as well. So I don't know. It's definitely an important thing to have an exit strategy. There's no right or wrong answer on there, but whatever fits. And if it's not going to move the needle, if it's not going to be a game changing decision for you, it's not as much right or wrong as just knowing what you want to do with your allocation in your portfolio.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, we'll move on to, so that was a long 36 minutes on principle number 7 there, but let's move on to principle number 8, and spend money on what matters most to you. So on this one, really what I was trying to get the point across, that hedonic adaptation, and you'll hear this a lot in the FIRE community, is a real thing, right? When you get the iPhone 12, what are they up to now?
12, yeah, 12. Yeah.
It's 12, yeah. When you get the iPhone 12, it's hard to go back to the iPhone 7, right? Like, does the iPhone 7 even work anymore? On LTE, I don't even know. But once you upgrade your life, and once you've kind of tasted how sweet life can be on the more expensive side, it's very easy to quickly adapt to it, right? So if you look at, third world countries, a lot of those people would be ecstatic to have clean running water in their house and a toilet. And there's billions of people who don't even have that. And here we are talking over the internet on these, $100 microphones, and talking about how to save expense ratios, right?
Yeah.
Like our life is so ridiculously blessed compared to a lot of people in the world. And if you can take time to have gratitude for that and recognize that, and then spend your money on what matters to you, and not on just all the, the BS that's out there. Like I remember when I fell into these traps too, but when I was, younger, it was like, oh, like when I joined the military, like I'll buy, a big SUV or buy a truck or something. And then I actually joined the military, and I was like, well, I don't actually want any of those things. Like, they're not, like, none of that is actually going to make me happy. I'm quite happy just to drive my little Japanese car around and get from point A to point B. But there are things that do make me happy that do cost a lot of money. Like, for instance, we talked about in the first episode, we went to the Four Seasons Lanai. And, that was an experience and a trip that I got to do with good friends and my wife. And we got to eat some good food and stay at a beautiful resort and go snorkeling and, do a ton of stuff that I enjoyed doing. And, it was an experience that's probably not going to be repeated for a long time, if ever.
And that was kind of a big splurge for me. That trip, we like to tease about how I'm a little bit of frugal in some ways, and then we'll splurge on something big. So fun memories, experiences are great. And things that just make your life easier or bring you and your family more joy. Like if you hate mowing your lawn, then splurge a little bit and get a lawn mowing service, and maybe skip out on some other purchase that is just trying to keep up with the neighbors, or a house cleaning service. Like hiring a maid does wonders for some people's quality of life, or their relationship with their spouse, or especially if you're both working, it can really help out just to spend a couple $100s a month to have someone come in and help either outside or inside the house. And that's the kind of stuff, like when you say spend money on what matters to you, fun memories, experiences, the stuff you do, like if you have kids, with your kids, when you splurge. I just splurged on tickets to a Dude Perfect show. I cannot believe I spent so much money on this stupid thing, but I'm just banking on the fact that my son is going to remember this for decades and decades and decades, that we went to see Dude Perfect live together. So it doesn't really matter to me, but it does to him. And so when you start to have kids, what matters to your spouse, what matters to you guys as a couple, what matters as a family is what's worth splurging on. And then don't worry about the fact that all your other friends have, the newest Bose headphones or AirPods or the coolest MacBook Air or whatever, unless that brings you a lot of joy. And then maybe it's something worth splurging on. But like your point about gratitude is so spot on, of just recognizing, like, I'm in a nice house and there's cool tile floor in the bathroom over here. And I have plenty of bedrooms and I have exercise equipment here and I have a really comfortable bed. And I don't need some of that other stuff, although I also have an iPhone 12. But so some days we're better at it than remembering, but just trying to practice that attitude of gratitude, if you will, to not be too cliche.
Yeah, I think there was a study recently, and I can find the actual citation, but it found that, when people spent money on time-saving activities, so like you said, the house cleaning service, the lawn mowing service, that brought them the most joy. I think even more so than spending money on somebody else. So just being like time rich, and which is something, when you're financially independent, you can really, you can have almost all the time in the world. If you look at a lot of the guys who have become FI, and you look at, what they don't just sit around the beach and do nothing, right? They get out there and they work on really cool projects. They produce music or they open up a co-working space.
But it's their choice.
Exactly. Yeah. It's their choice. And, if they want to do the dishes and they want to, clean the house, then that's their time, but they have the time to do that, and they're not afraid to spend money on what matters to them.
Nice. So I think that's a good one for number 8. The last and final one of the 9 is to buy income producing assets. So talk to us a little bit about how we can do that.
Yeah. So I don't actually like the author very much, but the guy, I can't remember his name right now, who wrote Rich Dad, Poor Dad. And, the concepts are in a lot of other books, but I know that a lot of people read that book and it's really eye-opening for them. But essentially it's thinking about, how do you buy assets to produce income to then buy the things you want? So if, for instance, the iPhone 12 is, picking on iPhones here again, $1,000, right? How much would it cost to buy something, an asset that produces $1,000 a year of income so you can buy iPhones for life? And depending on the return you're getting, so like say 7% in the stock market as on average, if you were to buy $15,000 worth of the S&P 500 index funds, or VTSAX, you could get $1,000 a year of growth off of that. And that would fund, your new iPhone every year. So it's just thinking about, instead of going into debt, instead of spending your income as you receive it, it's setting your income aside, buying income producing assets, and not spending all your money on things that are disposable or that decrease in value. A lot of people have the misconception that you can buy a car and, it holds its value, or, it's a great investment. And it's like, well, it might be to help you produce more income, but the car itself, unless you're Turoing or unless you're, driving for Uber, it's not producing any income. And so just looking at, and when you get a lump sum, right? Let's say you get a big bonus, a lot of service members, depending on their specialty, might get a $25,000, $30,000, $50,000 bonus, right? If they re-enlist for a couple of years. If you look at that as not a lump of cash that, oh man, I can go buy a car now. But if you look at that as, hey, that $50,000 is a stream of future income to myself if I invest it. And so that might mean, buying a house and renting it out, or it might mean putting it into the S&P 500 index fund and, putting it into your taxable brokerage account, not touching it for 10 years. And it's doubled, in 10 years now, that $50,000 is $100,000. And based on the 4% rule, you can pull $4,000 a year out of that pile of cash right there. So I just really wanted to drive home the idea of not just buying, because you got to buy things, right? You got to buy groceries, you got to rent a place, or, mortgage a place, but to also buy income producing assets Stocks 2% dividend a year plus the maybe 5% growth, 7% a year. If you look at rental property, that can throw off cash as well. If you look at businesses, depending on if you have the time in the military, a lot of people don't, but you could start a small business. Basically, separating working, trading your time for money, and putting your money to work, and then eventually becoming financially independent from that.
Yeah, that's really good. The number of things that we say that I'm getting this because it's a good investment
Right.
is just 99% of the time probably not true at all. And like you mentioned, cars, like the value of a car is depreciating almost every time. And if other than maybe like a weird chip shortage in the world or something like that, there's never a time where a car is a investment, probably, except in some rare cases, maybe a classic car or something, outlier like that. But so really be careful about what you say is, I'm buying this as an investment, unless it's actually producing some income and giving you a stream of income that you can then do whatever you want with. Like you said, I have an extra $1,000 a year now, so now I can buy a new iPhone every year instead of saying something's an investment just to make you feel better.
Yeah, exactly. So I cover all these three topics in depth, in these three principles in depth in my book, Military Money Manual, Practical Guide to Financial Freedom, which is off the publishers right now and will hopefully be available before before Thanksgiving 2021. Also, hopefully before Christmas. But yeah, this was good. I think we can put this one in the can. This was for the listener out there, this was the first time we've attempted to do this remotely. Jamie, unfortunately, had a PCS away from the beautiful island of Oahu.
Yeah, thanks for bearing with us as we tested the virtual setup. A couple times we stepped over each other, but I think I think it's going to sound great. And thanks for bearing with us for a little bit of a delay in between episodes as well, as my family and I adjusted to the new assignment out here.
All right, until next time.